Hello, welcome to SquishiVision, where I'm going to give my immediate reactions to Chapter 4 of the book of Boba Fett, which I think puts us just over halfway through. Yeah, so there's been some criticism which I can understand if I don't necessarily share with complete conviction that the pacing, well, actually no, scratch that, I do share it. I have enjoyed the show, but I do agree that pacing has been an issue. I don't think people have criticized the flashbacks, and I don't think the flashbacks are necessarily a problem. I think it's the pacing overall, and I think there needs to be a balance. Last week was what was widely considered the best episode of the series so far, by default, if nothing else. And a lot of people say that's because they focus more on the present day conflict, which is more interesting than the past day conflict. I don't think it's a matter of what's more interesting, but I can see what that's the thing. This episode kind of goes 50-50 in terms of the split, but what's the more interesting thing is it also seems to wrap up the flashback sequence, and I mean we don't know until next week, but it seems to imply there is no more flashback sequence to need. We have caught up on Boba Fett's background up to this point, and there's nothing else to explore, which seems surprising. So here's a weird thing: the timeline of the show is a bit confusing now. So between the end of Return of the Jedi, where Boba Fett falls into the pit of Calhoun, where the Sarlacc is, happens in 4 ABY. No. Yeah, 4 ABY, 4 years after the Battle of Yavin. And the Mandalorian happens at 9 after the Battle of Yavin. So there's a fair bit of difference between when he falls into the pit and when we see him in The Mandalorian and in the beginning and the present day sequences of this series. Now, we know he climbs out of the pit relatively soon after he falls in it. Well, yeah, relatively soon after he falls in it, within that same year, because what's his name now? The Marshal. Rob, I'm blanking the name, but the dude we see in the first episode of season 2, The Mandalorian, who has Boba Fett's armor, he gets that shortly after the destruction of the Death Star over Endor, because at the same time that happens, we see it happen, is when the biker gang comes in and takes over the village. And then, he can only presumably been running around in the desert for a certain amount of time. And there's a strong implication that when he gets picked up by the Jabbas, they already have Boba Fett's armor, or they collect it shortly after. I don't think there's an implication he was in there for a while. Oh, that's hot. And it tastes horrible when you mix it with the condiment taste of my dinner. This track's called Brendan Fraser for some reason. And the Jabba's already got his armor after he escaped from the pit. So he must have been in the pit. I can't remember what the time frame is of Return of the Jedi. From memory, I think it probably takes over a month, few, if that. So he must have been in the pit anything up to that point. So at least 4 to 5 years has passed between Return of the Jedi. At least 4 to 5 years have passed since he escapes the pit, and the entirety of the flashback sequence happens up until the latest part we see of the flashback. Now, the latest part that we see of the flashback, it seems to strongly imply that that's immediately, well, actually no, because he doesn't find Fennec Shand until 9 ABY, because it's the same year that the season 1 of Mandalorian was set. So even if there's a bit more to happen in there, there's only a span of what I think, a few months, maybe a couple of months, if even that, if even a couple of months. So we've pretty much, and then obviously we see him in season 2 Mandalorian, and it's pretty much the time frame is pretty packed after that point. So we've seen a vast majority of that 4 to 5 year period, but we haven't seen what seems to be 4 to 5 years worth of story. And obviously you can have time ellipses that cut out long periods of time, and nothing in this kind of implies that's, well, it has clearly happened, but we've not got the usual film language to imply what's happened. Until before this episode, the strong implication is we've probably seen a couple of months of his life. Like, we didn't get implication. Either he was with the Tuscans for a few months, and then he was on his own in the desert for years, which just seems unlikely because it just seems a pretty static thing to do. Or he was with the Tuscans for years, which would explain why his whole characterization has changed. And I mentioned this last week about how his characterization isn't really kind of actually fixed in canon, and a lot of us are projecting what we know from popular culture. But certainly, you know, someone who was willing to work with fascists and slave traders has now taken this much more progressive ideology in terms of running houses and crime gangs and a planet. Those years will certainly be the case, but I don't feel like we saw that part. Certainly, we saw a vast majority of his beginning with the Tuscans. That seems to be where the most of the focus was, when we saw... I mean, firstly, he was captured by them and not held in the best circumstances and basically used for slave labour. I'm not sure really what kind of take we're meant to take from that. Then he proved himself and was effectively given his freedom to kind of become part of the family, which is very Stockholm syndrome, but okay. And just judging by kind of the garbs he was wearing, I'm assuming that between the space of him getting his relative freedom, well, assuming the time between him being taken in by the Tuscans and the end of episode 2, when he's going through his initiation, he's dancing with them, he's part of the tribe now, probably takes over a couple of weeks up to a month, certainly very, very short amount of time. And then in the next episode we start off with him basically being like, yo, I'm gonna go get the tribute, and because the guys who like, if you want tribute from us, you gotta go to the competition first. This seems to be the first time they're doing it, so this seems to be like at least a month. I don't know how often you get tribute for a protection gang, but probably shortly after. So this, and then he goes back and they're all dead. So this could only have been over a couple of months. It doesn't seem really like he was there for years. But then it tells he was in the desert for years, doing very little. And you know, nothing except really implies a passage of time. Like, he goes and scouts out Jabba's palace. Is pretty much the first thing he does. Decides he doesn't have the firepower, and almost immediately, well, the next scene we cut to, basically there was no indication of a time ellipses. So we get what's given what seems to be a very short amount of time, but really a longer time as period. It's very, very odd. It's off-putting odd. It's really weird. It's weird it's weird pacing. It's like the opposite of slow pacing. It's too fast pacing. In fact, it's exactly that. But it all kind of checks out, I guess, narratively, and then we get some more. I guess we get a justification for his motivations, but they do seem very tacked on and rushed, and it's like not enough time for it to breathe and not enough time for him to grow naturally towards an audience, especially as this is a character who's been living rent-free in most of our heads for many, many years. Pretty much, many years. It depends on how you be a Star Wars fan, but as long as you pretty much have been one, and for some people that's decades. So it seems pretty odd to kind of then just... Yeah. Especially as we're kind of unsure about really what Boba Fett's place in this story is. He's clearly an anti-hero of sorts. But he's one who's being, you know, there's the in-universe facts bit. Like, if you're given a piece of paper with the facts of a character on, you make your own judgment as if they were a real person. And then there's the way the film language is telling you to think about the character. You know, the way they're shot, the way that they're framed, the soundscape around the character, all these things tell you things either to mislead you or to guide you into the characters. And Boba Fett, you know, in the show is being heavily signed to us as a character who we are meant to look up to. You know, usually anti-heroes, it's very grey. They're usually signed as characters, if done properly, they're signed as characters who you're meant to be at the very least strongly skeptical of, and even, you know, actively discouraged from following. The only reason they're an anti-hero is they do good things, you know. But they do it in a bad way. That's generally what makes them an anti-hero. Versus, I guess, an anti-villain who does bad things but in a good way. I guess that's why you don't really hear the phrase anti-villain. But yeah, so in this show, because in Return of the Jedi, where he was pretty much just a background prop, he was heavily signed as villainous, and also Empire Strikes Back. But in here, he's heavily signed as the protagonist, as the hero, as the kind of savior of Tatooine. So there needs to be something for us to kind of justify why we have that turnaround to now see this character as something else. And it's not really given that much. It's given a reason, but film-wise, it's not given enough weight, which is the kind of issue we're having here. But other than that, I mean, it was a generally good narrative. We get some more justification about what actually helped save Fennec Shand. I'm glad they clarified she wasn't actually dead, so we're not having to deal with the implication that resurrection is possible in the Star Wars universe, because that would... Well, short of miraculous Force activities, which is grounded in the universe of Star Wars, it's fine. The Force Awakens, Rise of the Skywalker had loads of issues, but its new Force powers was not one of them. It's pretty standard Star Wars to gradually introduce new Force powers, otherwise the franchise will stagnate. Please get over it. But yeah. Well, what was I saying now? You're on a tangent when you defend the sequels, and then you can't remember what point you were making. Yeah, sorry. So they established, you know, exactly what, and it was a kind of flash forward. No, it was a post-shadowing, I guess, of the biker gang for use on his modifications, and so explains why she decides to travel with him, essentially to pay off a debt, and then, you know, because she was, I guess, intrigued into where he was going, and he offered her the partnership, and that's kind of where it went from there. And yeah, we get pretty much the entire picture of the background, and then we cut to the present day scene, and jury's still out how competent a crime lord Boba Fett is. So what do we see him do? Well, apparently he's now fully recovered, and we do get a kind of slightly less makeup, slightly less deformed Tamura Morrison. He's allowed more of his natural skin color rather than look so pale. But that does imply he went 5 years with scarring and physical deformity, and then now somehow a few weeks in a bacta tank is apparently enough to kind of undo that damage. I mean, from my medical knowledge, which is to a degree existent, usually scarring of things are much more easily undone earlier. Most medical things with early intervention are undone more easily than it would be if they let set. Usually, if something is existing for 5 years, it's not gonna go. Like, for example, the scarring that I've got on my arm from when I was an idiot and put my arm too close to a drone propeller whilst trying to work out why the drone propeller wasn't working, and then I turned on the propeller to see what about it was being weird, and you can't, I don't know why I'm showing my arm when when the lighting is flushing out my skin, so you can't actually see it. But they have scars, and they're 5 years old, so they're probably never going to leave. So I don't like it at this point. So yeah, back to tank clearly works in ways normal medical science doesn't work, because generally that level of undoing of injury is not really possible. But I mean, hey, at least it's better. And then what else does he do? I think he goes on patrol, and basically you get a scene of a Wookiee being a Wookiee that ultimately just is only. And get, you know, but I forget her name, about the Twilight who runs the bar. Some nice kind of scene from her, where you don't know if she's successfully convinced the Black Wookiee to put down the Tundoshi and all, or walk away, and he rips off the arms. And then he recruits him, so he's got a new kind of muscle. And then he tries to recruit the other kind of, I guess, gang heads of gangs to like join a defensive alliance, as he puts it. And here's where I can't tell if he's kind of being very clever or progressive or whatever, by not forcing them to kind of become under his umbrella organization like they would have been under Jabba and giving him that independence, or if he's being naive. And I've mentioned this in much more detail last week, so I won't rehash old ground, partly because I probably did more justice last week than I did this week. And they ultimately none of them agreed to support him, but all they do is agree not to fight against him. Boba seems to think that they'll probably do that because it's their best chance of survival, and even they might help him because they don't want to be taken over by the Tech Syndicate. And then it ends with them being like, well, I guess we'll have to buy money. And Boba being like, yeah, I got tons of money, which I guess he does. I mean, he doesn't seem like a guy who has a lot of expenditure, but gets a lot of income. Yeah, this episode does kind of build upon last week's and carries on momentum fine. But I do think it kind of falls short in delivering really on the question of what has Boba Fett been doing over the last 5 years, and apparently very little. So those are my thoughts. I'm gonna end this stream and set up a new stream because I think 4 days ago, Wednesday, 4 days ago, I finally got to watch Spider-Man No Way Home. And I need to talk about that before I forget too much of the details. So I'll see you guys on the other side. So this, I guess, well, if you want to know when I'm going to stream, it'll be in the next couple of minutes. I need to make a thumbnail and set up stream, so probably about 5-10 minutes. If you want to keep fresh on my page, there's a quicker way to find out when I'm streaming, and that's subscribe and press the bell button. That being said, no one's watching this video at this point, so I don't know what I'm talking about right now. If you're watching this, the video's already been streamed. Go check it out. That's all I can say.